Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I had the opportunity to interview Candace Gantt, the founder and executive director of the Mind Your Brain Foundation. Candace has an incredible journey to tell from her experience with a traumatic brain injury that left her in a coma for several days. She's inspirational, thought-provoking, and really will leave you with some drive and determination to bring forward in your life. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy. Here is myself with Candace Gantt. Well, Candace, thanks for taking the time to chat today. I really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem. And for folks who aren't aware, I had the pleasure of speaking with Candace Gantt, who is the executive director of the Mind Your Brain Foundation, and also the founder as well. And we were talking about a little bit earlier that I've had the opportunity to hear your story throughout your brain injury recovery, your motivators, your setbacks, your tips, your advice for folks really in the brain injury community. And it is a very inspirational message. And I'd love to hear a little bit more of kind of the Candace before the injury, leading up to the injury, and then really your perspectives and your takeaways coming out of that injury, leading up to the Mind Your Brain Foundation. So why don't I kind of kick it to you, and we can just have a discussion here, and certainly would love to hear a little bit more. So Candace, again, thank you for joining. And I know I didn't cover it all in the introduction about who you are. So why don't I kick it over to you, and you can take it away. So yeah, bring me back. I'd love to hear more.
Thanks so much. Yes, I don't know how far back to start, so I'll just start with my career. Well, I could actually start with my family. I have a beautiful husband and two children, and they are right now 25 and 20, just turned 20 this week. So I'm surrounded by all that love in my home. But I will tell you that by profession, I was the executive director of Ritz Carlton Hotel Company. I was responsible. I opened 17 hotels for Ritz Carlton in my career. And then I went on not only in operations, but after operations, I worked in their corporate office as the corporate director of reservations. So I managed all of the reservations component, including their 800 number, the toll-free number reservation center that was in Omaha. That was under my responsibility, and I traveled the world. It was the sweetest job I'm sure that I've ever going to have. It gave me the opportunity to do some terrific traveling and work with the finest hoteliers in the world. So that's really my background. Although I have a marketing degree, I just landed into that profession, and it was just so rewarding for me, and to be out there in that community.
And so have you always had an interest in hospitality management operations, or how did you even get into that in the first place? Was the young Candace, was that something that you're into growing up in your childhood, and that was like a draw, or where does that come from?
It was absolutely by accident, because my degrees, I have 2 degrees in marketing and management. I thought about accounting, but as my dad reminded me that it's a stay-at-home, a desk job, and so that might not have suited my personality and his wisdom. And so that I went into marketing and management, and I went to New York City with my resume in hand and hope and high dreams of becoming a marketing guru. And as it turned out, there weren't that many opportunities for me. And as I was leaving Grand Central Station, there was a big banner on a hotel that was opening up, the Hyatt, and they were looking for managers. So that was my opportunity. That was my foot in the door. I took my resume, and I was hired not a week later to be a housekeeping manager, which really meant I was a supervisor to the housekeeping and inspected rooms. It was my college degree. So it's nothing what I had expected, but it turned out to be just a great dream now that I've had, working with Hyatt initially, and then on to Ritz Carlton.
Yeah, and you went to, where did you go to college?
I went to Clarion State College here in Pennsylvania.
Oh, great, great. So all the Pennsylvania folks watching, we have a local in the house, so we certainly
Yes.
appreciate that. I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, as you know. So all my friends, they all went to Penn State, Lehigh Valley, and somehow I went to University in Maryland. My mother was an alumni there, so I kind of got the draw there. But yes, the Pennsylvania roots are strong, as you know.
They run
You
deep.
know, yeah, and that is for sure. So New York City, that had to have been some sort of an adjustment coming from, I don't say small town Pennsylvania, but it's
Yeah.
kind of fast when you're outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. It's really kind of a little bit more rural. Was that a big shock going up to New York, or did your family spend time there before and you're kind of used to it as a kid?
Yes, so it was a culture shock for sure. We were transplanted from Pennsylvania. Actually, Akron, Ohio is where I was born, but in New York, my dad was accepted a position with American Airlines as an executive, and also for ABC years later. And so he was working in New York City, and we lived in Tarrytown, New York, which is the legend of Sleepy Hollow, which you may remember. And I went to Sleepy Hollow High School. And so I was always close to New York, but I went back to my roots in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And then after I completed my degrees, I went back to New York City.
Was it just the big draw of New York at the time, or is it something that you've always kind of thought you wanted to take a shot at from a, after college perspective? Some people do the gap year, some people go abroad. You went resume in hand to New York to knock on the doors, and that makes a lot of sense, knowing a little bit about you and how driven you are in terms of getting things done, and how we met, obviously, at March, at the Brain Injury Awareness on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And I kind of got that, I kind of picked that up right on, about you right away. It's kind of the persistence and the drive. And so I'm not shocked at all that you went to New York City, where, if that's what you want to be, that's where you go.
The opportunities for employment were grand. And so, of course, that was the attraction. But of course, being young and not foolish, but young and ambitious, that I thought that would be a great start. And it really was.
That's
Just
right.
not in the direction I
How long
expected.
did you spend in New York?
I was in New York for 5 years.
Okay.
And then I was
afterwards?
promoted.
Mm.
I went from New York City to they were opening hotels after my tenure in New York, and so I went to the Hyatt in Greenville. I was at the Hyatt in Knoxville. I was at the Hyatt in San Francisco, the Hyatt in Miami. So those following 7 years, I moved 5 times and was promoted at each level.
Wow. Wow. So you travel quite a bit. And I'm sure you have some great stories to tell that you probably cannot tell on camera about your time in the hotel industry, as I would imagine.
Yes, yes. I was at the World's Fair in Knoxville when I was there, which was just a terrific experience. And San Francisco, that's a whole nother world. That was a culture shock as well for me, being on the West Coast. But I think in general, I would say that it was a great experience, and certainly it gave me the opportunity when I applied for Ritz Carlton that I had amassed experience and wisdom and a drive and a passion for working with a hotel company.
Oh, wow. So the time period between your career at the Ritz, maybe take us a little bit, the progression from there up to the day that really kind of changed your life. At that time, were you married? Did you have kids? Were you still a younger professional? Maybe help scope a little bit of the timeline for us.
Sure. So I believe that I would consider myself a young professional. I went to work for Ritz Carlton, and then I started to travel the world, helping them open hotels and run the Reservations Center. So I really had not a lot of time for dating and pursuing my social life. I was single that whole time, and pretty close to the end of my 10 years with Ritz Carlton, I met Mr. Wonderful. And that changed the trajectory of what I was going to do for my career since I traveled so much. When I was married, my husband traveled quite a bit as he works in the pharmaceutical business. And with his schedule, we decided that only one of us, if we were going to start a family, only one of us was going to be able to stay home. And I volunteered for that after I'd done so much traveling. I was happy to have some roots planted.
Oh, well. And to clarify, we're not talking about Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary on TV Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful, Mr. Gantt at this point.
Correct. A different Mr. Wonderful. My Mr. Wonderful.
You're Mr. Wonderful. Gotcha. And so how long then between Mr. Wonderful and now you said you have 2 kids?
Yes, we started a family at that time when I left Ritz Carlton.
Great. Daughter is, I know she's also in the Mind Your Brain Foundation, Vanderbilt Law. Is that correct?
That's correct. She graduated from Vanderbilt Law, and now she's in Houston, Texas, working for Paul Hastings' law firm.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure you're extremely proud.
So proud of her.
Yeah, and then I don't know much about your other child. There's a younger or older?
That's a younger daughter. They're 6 years apart. So my younger daughter, Morgan, is at Notre Dame University right now in her sophomore year.
Wow.
And she's quite accomplished as well. She's a D1 athlete. She's on the crew team and just got some great news that she'll be in the 1V as a sophomore, which is the varsity boat, which is exciting. And she'll be racing, God willing, with the COVID is under control. She'll be racing this spring.
Wow. And which is amazing, and congrats to you and Mr. Wonderful on really, I'm sure just raising amazing daughters, and hopefully I'll be able to meet them at some point. You mentioned your younger daughter, D1 athlete, and I know that you have some athletic genes as well. When I met you, I know we were talking about your previous experiences doing triathlons and Ironman. Is that kind of where she picked it up? Maybe talk a little bit about any training that you're doing previously and kind of that section of your life from an athletic perspective.
Sure. And I'm hoping they picked a little bit of that. We would like to be an active family. And sadly, they were dragged to many races when I was competing, but I think that served them well now. And after I stopped working and started a family, wanted to fill some of the gaps in my activity, keeping busy. And instead of working, I decided that I would pursue being an athlete for triathlons. I could bike and I could run, and I loved running. That was really my passion. I picked up biking and I took right to it. My swimming's less so. I'm not a strong swimmer, but I always considered my swim in the triathlon races that I would swim only to get to my bike. That was just a survival technique. If I could just get out of the water, the race will begin. And so that was my motivation for doing that. And I competed. I started out like everyone, you do your first race and you just love it. It was a 5K. It was a short sprint triathlon. Had a passion for it. I was also doing a lot of running. And so I would run half marathons every once in a while. And that it just resonated with me. I could solve the world's problems when I was out on a run. It was very calming and peaceful for me.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite race?
I do. And sadly, it's not a race right now. They disbanded, but it was Eagleman, which is a half Ironman in Maryland.
Yeah. I was planning on doing the half Ironman last September, but I did not come around to it in the current state, and I kind of bailed. But I'm hoping, I don't know about this September, but maybe following September to kind of pull the trigger, because I've always been looking at that race. I did one half Ironman, my only one in Raleigh, North Carolina. And
nice.
It was a great race. And I remember the water, though, when I first started, it was so warm. It was like probably 70 degrees. It was that warm. And by the time I got out of the water, and I'm not a great swimmer, I was cramping so bad because I couldn't sight well, and I was kind of just kicking my legs, but I kind of powered through it. And then I was cramping so bad by the time I got on the bike. I didn't think I was going to make it, but
It hurts me to think about.
oh, it hurt so bad. So I already have that like shock factor in the back of my mind. Like if I'm going to do it again, I got to get that swim right to the point where
Yes.
I'm not killing myself on the bike in the run.
Yeah, the bike was always a catch up for me because I was
Yeah.
the back of the pack for the swim.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. Hopefully the world will resume to all races and in the not so distant future. But until then, everyone's got their Pelotons and outside, running as much as possible and indoor workouts. So
Agreed.
we'll get there eventually. So maybe talk a little bit about leading up to the accident. Can you maybe just tell folks kind of what happened? And really kind of how things changed so dramatically for you. So that'd be nice to hear. I know it did happen while you were on a bike. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I had just finished a half Ironman. I was in Lake Placid doing Tin Man, competing in Tin Man. And so I'd been training for a year or so and thinking I was in pretty good shape. And I did successfully completed, although it was the hottest day of the year, never to be forgotten, in Lake Placid, 90-degree day, and the run had no shade. So that really, those type of memories, that visual picture you have, stay with you for your whole life. That was quite an amazing race, no pun intended. And so that was the early part of July, and on this second week and going to my third week of July 21st was the date of my accident. I was out riding my bike just for fun. I wasn't training. My training was over, so I was really enjoying it and had no purpose except to let the wind in my hair and really enjoy just to enjoy the outdoors again without having to drive myself to just not to drive myself to a schedule of training.
Right.
And I was with one of my neighbors who is trained with me for Ironmans as well. And we were on Goshen Road in Chester County. It's a country road by all descriptions. We're passing farms, and it's a 2-lane road. I was bicycling. I like to believe I was going really fast because that's the mentality you have when you're a competitive racer. And I was down in my aero bars coming down. I was actually coming up a hill, cresting a hill, when a construction vehicle, a truck carrying on the back of it a small cement mixer on the trailer. And the trailer, the gentleman went wide to pass me on a hill, and you can picture that. Why would you do that? Because you don't know what's coming up the other side of the hill on a 2-lane road. And he passed me, and as soon as he got to the top, there was an oncoming car. And so he quickly switched into my lane, and the trailer fishtailed and hit me on my bike. Wow. And I was at that same moment at a telephone pole. And so I was launched into that telephone pole and hit it with the right side of my brain, still clipped into my bike.
I can't imagine how quickly that, or maybe how long that sequence of events must have felt like from you kind of coming up the hill.
It's you replay it a lot of times. I can remember bits and pieces only because there was someone with me that was able to fill in the blanks of my memory. And she knew immediately because I had hit the telephone pole, and which caused me to fly into a stockade fence and then back like a ping pong ball, and then back because of the force back onto the tarmac to the road. And she knew immediately. She was right behind me and recognized that I was flailing, holding my head with my helmet on and just flailing. So immediately within, when she assessed this, it took her just a minute to figure out that it was not that there was some serious injury.
Yeah.
So she called 911 immediately.
And then from there, you're taken right to the hospital. Or, how did your friend making the phone call until the hospital, did it take very long to get there? Were you close to a hospital?
So it's an interesting series of events. So there was, unbeknownst to me at the time, there's a local hardware store and a physician. He's actually an ER doctor at Penn Medicine. So we're in the suburbs, and he was late for work, but he had to stop and get something for his family. And he is actually the trainer for the EMTs in our county. So he's on the radio as well, listening to all the calls. And since he was running late for work, he heard the call, and he actually arrived at the scene before the ambulance did.
Wow.
And he was able to, as you know, from being an emergency room doctor, he could tell immediately that I had a traumatic brain injury. My facial, my left side of my cheek and face, I had crushed facial bones and a broken clavicle and a collapsed lung, so I was having difficulty breathing. So he actually, at that time, without the ambulance being there, he called Penn's emergency services, and they dispatched a helicopter right away. So I was airlifted. And the helicopter came, and since I was near a farm, they landed in a field next to where I was. So there was lots of room to land that big helicopter. So the ambulance arrived and sedated me because I was flailing, and you can't do that in a helicopter. And then I was airlifted right to Penn Medicine, and I was followed immediately by that doctor who had originally seen me on the side of the road.
And how long did you have to spend at Penn Medicine?
I arrived at Penn Medicine, and I was assessed immediately, knowing that I had a traumatic brain injury. They equip you with an intracranial pressure bolt. So they drill actually into your cranium, and they put that in to measure the pressure, because the higher the pressure goes, the more alarming the swelling of the brain. It detects the swelling of the brain, and you can actually squeeze the brain stem, which controls all of your involuntary, your breathing, your lungs, your heart. And so that was really a critical time to watch the pressure, the cranial pressure. And of course they inflated my lungs, and I was at that point, as the pressure increased, I went into a coma. And it was later on, and again, they're monitoring this pressure bolt, the ICP, and there's a level that you reach that is actually life-threatening. And 5 hours into my stay at Penn, I was then moved to the neurotrauma center. And as soon as that pressure had elevated, they did an emergency craniotomy they performed, which is removing your skull plate on the left-hand side to allow the brain to swell. So I had that done that first night of my stay at Penn Medicine.
Oh man, that's a lot. Thank you.
A lot for your family too. My poor family suffering through that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And it certainly seems, if you believe in the, divine intervention, that the ER doc happened to be late for work that day and come when he did and get you right to Penn Medicine. And we know how good they are. That's pretty incredible. You kind of think about the sequence of events there.
Yeah, indeed. And the other blessings that we had was that the doctor on duty was the chair of neurosurgery for Penn Medicine. His name is Dr. Sean Grady. And the fact that he was called in was just a miracle happening, because this is his expertise. And there are a lot of postdocs there. There was a lot of course, attention to my injuries, but he left his dinner table and came in to perform that emergency surgery. So we're very thankful for his wisdom and insight and expertise in saving my life.
And how long was post-acute, post-recovery? You were in a coma for how long?
So I was in a coma for 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
And then they start to slowly, through medication, hopefully they wean you from your medication to see what kind of cognitive abilities you have. And as they were doing that, I could twitch a finger and so on. So I was in I was actually woke up from the coma after 2 weeks and was moved to a step down unit where they continued to assess the damages.
Yeah. And so at this point, yeah, obviously it's well known, it'd be classified as severe traumatic brain injury. I'm sure folks who are watching or know you would not be able to pick up on that, because the way you present now is just, incredible, knowing kind of your backstory to how you got to where you are. And I'm sure the post-acute recovery was a lot of patience, a lot of perseverance, a lot of hard work.
That is your world. Yes.
What was the hardest part, or maybe not the hardest part, of getting into the mindset of recovery and saying, I need to try to get back to as close to where I was as possible? Like, what are you thinking about? How was that process for you?
I was moved from Penn Medicine then to Bryn Mawr Rehabilitation Center here, closer to my home. And I went there in a wheelchair. No walking. I could answer one word answers to questions, yes or no. So that was my baseline. That was really the lowest point, I think, of my recovery, is when I recognized that something was seriously wrong and I was struggling mightily to process it. Your memory fails you. You don't really know some of especially when you're in a coma and with such a severe head injury, a lot of your short-term memory is lost. So I couldn't understand even why I was in rehabilitation. All I wanted to do was go home. I had these little ones at home and I was desperate to get there. So I told the PT, OT, all the T's, all the therapists, anybody who would listen to me, give it all to me. That was my competitive edge. Bring it on. And whatever tools and whatever you can provide to me to recover, to regain my speech, my language, processing, memory, walking. I remember at Bryn Mawr Rehab, I asked one of my physical therapists if I could go out for a run. And meanwhile, I had a helmet on because I was still missing, half of my skull, and I wanted to go out for a run. And this was probably just a month into my stay there. And I don't think he knew how to answer. He was really stumbling for the right language to use that I would understand why I couldn't run, because it was obviously an obvious, silly question. I was just learning to walk. And he said, if you talk to the head, if you can get permission from the head of the center, who I saw often because he was doing assessments on me, and Dr. David Long, if you'll talk with him about it, I'm sure he'll give you the right direction on when you can start running again. So I saw him in the hallway as I was doing my laps up and down the hallway. And again, asked if I could start running. And he said, if you can find somebody to run with you, if there's a PT here that will run with you, because of course he was thinking I would get lost on the campus of Bryn Mawr, if you can find somebody to run with you, you have my permission. So I interviewed every single person that I could find to see if anybody, and of course, when I say run, I really mean 50 yards. It wasn't and that, I think, was the turning point where I could find somebody to be outside. I felt alive again.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me how, as you meet brain injury survivors, warriors, and they'll talk about a part of them that they've lost or they're trying to regain, post injury. It's just really interesting how that competitive drive that was there before the injury and obviously leading up to, as you were, you were out training and maybe not gearing up for an Ironman, but you were still training your body and doing what you love, to how that really propelled you after injury to kind of kick right back in and say, I got to get home to my daughters. I want to get better. I want to start doing what I used to do and do it to the best of my ability. It's very fascinating how some things don't leave and some things take more time. And unfortunately, some things you don't quite get back to where they were.
Indeed, indeed. But I will say that that drive really kept my positive attitude. I think that was part of my recovery, that I really had to have a target and drive to it like a missile. I really needed a focal point. And I will say that after my 6 months had been my rehabilitation inpatient and then outpatient, that 6 years later, I ran the Boston Marathon.
Wow.
And then 7 years later is when I competed in a full Ironman.
It's incredible.
So you need goals.
That's
You need
right.
you need big ones.
And
Big
did you
goals.
set those goals? And when we talk about goal setting, for any individual, really in any circumstance, but obviously recovery as well. Now, did you post that on your wall? Boston Marathon, Ironman. Was that something that when you started your rehab, that was okay after year 1, year 2, year 3, like that's what I want to get to? Like, how did you set mini goals to begin with? I'm sure it wasn't just from 0 to Boston Marathon. You gotta
Right.
you got to do your 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile, 50 yards before then. So how is about that progression? How did you manage that with your rehab team?
Yeah. My journey, I really would tell you, is elevated by the running club that I belong to, Fast Tracks here in Valley Forge. And this community is really what lifted me up in my athletics. That was I had people to run with, because again, everyone was worried that I would be lost when I went out for a run. So I always had a companion with me. And other members of our club were running marathons, and it flowed. I don't think I really, to answer your question, I don't think there was a mission to compete in Boston, but I think it was a progression of it was a way that I could judge my healing. I could run a 5K, so then I should run a 10K. Okay, that would mean that I'm improving in my cardiovascular, and I could have time to do this. I had to really manage my time properly so I wasn't exhausted in my recovery.
Right.
And I think that's how it progressed. I just my goals kept growing one step at a time.
Was it difficult to cognitively process your first run afterwards, like say your 5K or your half marathon, in terms of how far you've come, how far you need to go, when you need to stop and get water, when you need to remember to have something to eat, whether it's a gel, it's a powder, it's, a salt tablet. Was that more difficult to get back in terms of the actual, pre-race preparation, but then during the race as well, to make sure that you're trying to keep on track? Was that, like, how do you process that cognitively as you're kind of building on your goals?
That's a great question, because that I would write, as you suggested, during a race, you have gel packets.
Right.
And so I had to be immensely organized. And I knew that. And I would number my gel packets so that I knew, and I would write the time on my hand, what time I should take it, or how many miles. That my first mile I should take this, I should do this. And I had reminders, like you do sticky notes, and I had them written on my hands and on the packets of my nutrition.
Smart.
You find tools, you find ways, as you learn strategies.
You adapt. And the power of the team, you mentioned earlier, big advocate for, if you're training for something or you're recovering, that you have to have the right team around you.
You need a posse.
You have to have your posse. And it's nice that you found that community that you've been part of before, and we're able to go back to it to kind of lift you up, even if it's not specific. You're not in post-acute recovery, but you have your team here, and it is like your support group, and they're going to help you out, and you're going to run with them and really kind of use that group to help propel you to your goals. I think that really does speak to the power of team, and
it sure does.
And training for anything, but especially athletics, is running is such a solitary sport, but when you train with partners or if you run with friends, it really can help amplify your goals, whatever that may be at the end of the day.
Well put, indeed.
So you do your Ironman, or you do Boston, you do the Ironman, you're checking off the athletic goals. At what point, either before or after, do you start thinking about possibly setting up a foundation, giving back? Where do you see the gaps, or you see the needs, and how does that all kind of come together, with starting a foundation?
And again, that was, as we talked about earlier, was that a goal? Not necessarily. I think that just evolved out of desperation. And that was that I had lots of support on my journey to recuperate from my physical injuries, but not my cognitive injuries. And that was still played a large part in my role at home, that I was still struggling with memory and with organizing tasks for my family, cooking dinners and shopping, and even to the point early on that I couldn't pick out clothes. I was overwhelmed by the decisions in my closet to match clothes and to go to the grocery store. And I step by step overcame those over time and lots of practice, lots of strategies. But I knew even after 5 years that I was reading Dr. Seuss to my 4-year-old at that time, and she was correcting me with the words that I was mispronouncing. So I knew that's a simple version, but I knew that I couldn't discuss at the dinner table any activities during the day. If I'd listened to the news in the morning, could I discuss analytically any news reporting? For instance, talking about something complex. If I heard on the news in the morning that there was a series of events that took place and it was complicated and there was lots of directions involved in it, I could not regurgitate it. I couldn't analyze that information and repeat it at the dinner table. So I was recognizing that I was really having I couldn't have a dinner conversation. And that was pretty significant, that I couldn't communicate well. So that's when I realized, sorry.
Yeah, so what'd you do?
That's when I went back to Penn. Well, first I went to Bryn Mawr Rehab. I said, what do you have for me? And that was considered, I guess other people would celebrate it, but I was considered high functioning, which I know now means I can tie my shoes. But at that time, I was pretty proud of myself, and they had no more therapies that they thought would improve my outcome. So I went back to my neurosurgeon at Penn Medicine and said, please send me in the direction. Please, is there any information, any support you can give me? And sadly, as a neurosurgeon, he wasn't aware of any trials or anything that I could take advantage of. And so for a couple of years after that, I started to do a lot of self-help, as we all do when there's a deficit. We can fix that. And I did a really deep dive into reading material and studying and educating myself on rehabilitation techniques and services. And then I realized, I went back a couple of years later to my neurosurgeon and said, there's people out there that are suffering mightily from all these deficits that I've experienced. And I know that they have no help and no hope. And we discussed this. He and I both had pretty much an hour-long discussion about the despair that other brain injury survivors experience. And it was out of his foresight that he recommended that Penn Medicine have a patient-centric conference out of neurosurgery, which is almost unheard of because the surgeons never see the survivors again most of the time after their recovery. And so on his encouragement, I partnered with Penn Medicine to put on the first Mind Your Brain free conference for brain injury survivors and their caregivers.
And that was, what year was the first?
It was 2000. What year was that? 2015.
2015, so about five years now. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, so that's the first conference, and how did it go? How was the turnout? Like, what was the reaction? Yes. What was the learning experiences of going and putting on a conference? I in my mind, I'm saying, okay, well, she's probably drawing on all her experience from the Ritz Carlton, but then I'm also like, well, okay, after the injury, how much of that is still kind of clicking right back into place in terms of operations, in terms of marketing, in terms of kind of getting the right folks together to grow and to build something. So, I mean, how was that like in terms of just putting the pieces in place?
Operationally, I was blessed to have that powerful Penn medicine behind me, because they have all of the infrastructure that's needed to put on conferences. And I had the pleasure of working with the Center for Brain Injury and Repair. And I also had a lot of good friends of mine rally to my rescue when I told them I was going to put on a conference. They were happy and excited, enthusiastic to be my support team, my support crew, my wingmen, to put on the conference, to work with Penn and CBIR. So the first year you asked, we had 50 attendees. And again, we were celebrating wildly that we had reached that many people. And of course, the HIPAA laws prevent us from reaching many more. And through Penn's power of marketing, fast forward to 5 years, 6 years later, we had 350 attendees, right, which was just remarkable. And in fact, we were oversold, and we had to turn a few people away, which kept me up late at night. So we won't let that happen again, but it's gone virtual now. But that was the progression of how it really exploded, and the idea that we could help this many people in our community.
That's great. And the mission of the foundation is providing resources, knowledge, information for those who, I think we talk, those who kind of slip through the cracks
Yes.
of the current system, right? And it's, where do you go to find resources for rehabilitation, to find information, to, as you said, kind of do the research on.
We want to be the safety net.
Or a safety net. That's a great way to put it. So now you have every year there's a conference, every March, is that correct? That's
correct, during Brain Injury Awareness Month.
Right, so this March, is it going to be virtual or is it in person this March? Virtual, I would assume.
It is, it's going to be virtual on March 27th.
Okay, March 27th. And along with that, you're starting a Wednesday wellness program with this virtual as well. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of what's the format of the program and what we're looking to do from a wellness perspective.
Sure. Well, we recognize that that the sad state of affairs, the underserved community and vulnerable brain injury community needs help more than once a year. So we started with that, and we would connect them with all the help and hope that they needed at that time. But recovery journeys are years, months, years. And so we embarked on another opportunity to reach that population with Wellness Wednesdays. And so that 3 Wednesdays a month, we would offer content. The first one would be a presentation by an expert, a brain injury expert, in either rehabilitation or physical therapies on many levels of recovering from the deficits you may have encountered. And then the second week is interactive. You can ask questions about that topic with a professional. And the third one is a support group type format where you could have interaction with other survivors that have experienced those same challenges that you have.
Very interesting. And so it's all virtual, which is, I think, a great format. And the idea is to, as you said, kind of fill the gaps, provide the information, knowledge, but more importantly, provide that platform and social place where folks can come and go and ask questions, get them answered by top professionals, top certified brain professionals in the industry, and really be that sounding board that is a little above and beyond a helpline, which is also very helpful. But this is an opportunity for them to engage one-on-one with folks who have been there, but also with professionals who can provide advice on where to go and what to do. Because there are so many questions from,
oh my gosh,
what do I need? Where do I go? How do I get funded?
Where do I start?
How do I tell my family? How do I help them through the transition? How do they help me? Everything that kind of goes along with, what you've been through and what millions of individuals go through, each year in the United States and around the world who experience a brain injury.
Great. And I would say that Success Rehab has been such a huge part of this initiative with Wellness Wednesdays as a partner for us in providing content, but also the leadership and what it looks like to put on a wellness workshop and to have a thinking partner. And that's been so valuable to have somebody that has this level of expertise in brain injuries that would help us accomplish this and reaching out to that community.
Well, that's very exciting. And, I think the best part about it is, we know, and anyone knows Candace and is just learning about, how strong of a network you can bring together because of your personality and your drive. And so I think folks kind of rest assured that, whoever you bring onto the program, whether it's in person, virtually, is going to be really kind of the best of the best. So they'll be getting some really great information and feedback. And so that's a big kudos to you and how you just kind of go about life. I think that's really, something special. Tell me a little bit now about your plans for the next couple years. Like, let's give me kind of a grand vision of where you're going with Mind Your Brain, what you're looking for, who you're trying to help. And we can kind of end it with that. But, what do you really see for the future of Mind Your Brain and Candace as you kind of go along your journey here?
And Kevin, again, I don't think we ever planted the stake that this would be the end result, but it's evolved and it's exciting about how we can improve the lives of brain injury survivors. And one of the ways we want to do that is by actually having them a resource center for every day. We're hoping to plant it in Philadelphia with, again, the help of Success Rehab, the experts in the field. We would like to have a brick and mortar for brain injury survivors to attend classes every day, 5 days a week, and get the resources they need. Someone that could help them apply for other resources, help them OVR, vocational rehabilitation, community reentry, having a community of like-minded, of their peeps, of other survivors, and how they can grow together and lift each other up and support each other. So I think the long-term goal in the next 2 to 5 years would be to explore and to open a Mind Your Brain Recovery Resource Center.
Great. That's very, very exciting.
Lofty.
And yeah, so tell me where can folks go to follow what you're doing? And Mind Your Brain I know there's a website and Instagram. So maybe if you want to talk a little about where they can find this information that's now and upcoming in the future.
Sure. And the easiest way to find us is through our website, which is one word, mindyourbrainfoundation.org. And that would be the place that we have our Wellness Wednesdays information. If you want to register for the Mind Your Brain at Penn Medicine on March 27th, that registration link is on there. And we have also podcasts that you can listen to on a variety of subjects by experts. That's housed in that warehouse in our libraries. And so that would be I would say that would be your go-to.
Great. And Instagram at Mind Your Brain Foundation.
Correct. Instagram.
Okay. Make sure you get on Instagram, LinkedIn. I know you guys are everywhere, so that's great. I'm sure folks will find you. And thanks again, Candace, for sharing a little bit about your story and your mission and where you're headed. And it's cool to be able to do this and really kind of sit down and spend the time. So yeah,
thanks,
great.
It's been a pleasure talking with you and sharing with you. I'm always thrilled to be around like-minded, to be around people that have a passion for helping this community. And I thank you for that and success.
Great. Thank you, Candace.
Thank you.